if you are going through spiritual crisis, you are regenerating. It's a good thing.
The Bible is just telling you the story of Jesus, the inner life of Jesus Christ, and you might think, well, I don't really need to know all the details of that.
What's changed is not necessarily the context of everything, but everything inside has changed, so everything around us is perceived to be different.
If Joseph Campbell has discovered this, I think there's another face on it, which is the Swedenborg thing. Hey everybody, welcome to Swedenborg in Life. Today we're talking about the 4 life-changing stages of spiritual awakening. My guest today, I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Dylan Odener and Reverend Alan Cowley. Thanks so much for coming on the show. These are the co-founders of Golden Thread Labyrinths, which we'll talk about near the end of the show. What we're doing for the show today, everybody, is we're talking about this 4 stages of spiritual growth. You could slice it different ways, but the life is this journey where you get better at something. Like something goes good. And you see that a lot in Swedenborg. He talks about this thing called regeneration. But this is something the whole world talks about in all kinds of ways. And broadly speaking, you could say there's this arc that's called the hero's journey. We want to look at how those things match up. So how did Swedenborg see it when he peeked behind the veil of reality, and how artists and thinkers seen it forever. So that's what I hope to do, is try to establish that connection. We'll see where the conversation goes. But just to prime the audience, in case they're not familiar, Dylan, can you talk a little bit about what I mean when I say the hero's journey, and where does that show up in culture?
Yeah. So the hero's journey is actually more often called the monomyth, and it was discovered, would be the best word for it, by almost, you could say, the first pop mythologist, if that makes sense, and that's Joseph Campbell. So in the late 40s and 50s, he wrote his most famous book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Yeah.
And even just that title, what he is getting at in its simplest form is the idea that upon millions of heroes over history, whether that's Jesus or Gilgamesh or Harry Potter, whoever,
Luke Skywalker,
yeah. Katniss Everdeen, right? That these heroes are all the same hero with a bunch of different masks, a bunch of different faces. So the concept of a monomyth, or the monomyth, is the one myth. So what he saw in his, taking of psychologists like Jung and Freud, and his own studies of mythology, the world mythology, which we all kind of have gotten the sense that there's this comparative mythology, this sort of magical human thing where there's a flood myth in every major culture. There's a paradise and paradise lost. There are these cookie cutter or archetypal shapes or forms of these stories that seem to come back again and again and again.
I know. I'm reading this series of fiction books, and I was reading it for a while, and it's about these guys who are going on an adventure, and I kind of got tired of that author, and I was like, okay, I'm done. I enjoyed the part before where they were in their traveling phase, where they're on the run from the evil thing, and then I started reading this new series, and I'm back to that same phase in it. It's like they're on the run from this thing, they're camping out in the woods. I'm like, I got back to where I want. Totally different author, written in different decades, but it's there.
Yeah. There's almost this. Remember when you were in school, and there are these synchronicities when you're studying geometry and you're studying history, and suddenly they're lining up.
Yeah.
And you can you're going through that same cycle, the same hero's journey. So, so this monomyth, I say discovered because Campbell would never say that he created this. That would be, they'd be undercutting the whole thing, right? He's saying
I created Antarctica.
Right. As if the, scientists created the dinosaurs when they pulled those bones out of the ground. He says, I am one person who started to dissect it and analyze it a bit better, and maybe I can put it forth in a way that's really digestible, so that people say, oh, I already knew this, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Whenever you start a story with once upon a time, right? You're falling into an archetypal pattern.
It's not that you have to. You don't have to, but it so happens that something about that resonates in your heart, and that's why those stories emerge to be these famous ones. And all the ones that didn't follow that pattern, you just don't hear about them because they don't resonate the same way. I'm really excited to dig into this because I'm just thinking as you're saying that. So if Joseph Campbell has discovered this, I think there's another face on it, which is the Swedenborg thing, that he gives you this deep dive into maybe some of what underlies that, and also, not to get ahead of ourselves, but he'll talk about like an internal sense to the Bible, and that on one level, the Bible is just telling you the story of Jesus Christ, the inner life of Jesus Christ, and you might think, well, I don't really need to know all the details of that, but if Jesus is like the monomyth of the monomyths, it's telling you your own story too. So I'm excited to dig into that. But in case people aren't familiar, Alan, could you talk a little bit about what's regeneration? What's Swedenborg's process he describes that we all go through?
Yeah, and it's interesting thinking about. There's a passage I couldn't tell you the number, but it talks about how had the Bible been written about some other group or some other culture other than the Israelites, it would have been different content, meaning the stories would have been slightly different,
right,
but the internal spiritual meaning for us would have been the same.
Yep.
So it's this fascinating thing that it's a mythology in itself, the Bible, but it's a beautifully correspondential mythology. And I think that one of the things that Campbell's picking up on is that it is kind of a universal mythology that we all kind of have to contextualize the human experience in. And that comes up in different ways in different cultures. Swedenborg, I think, does a similar thing of breaking it down into sections. Like we'll talk about the hero's journey and its parts. Swedenborg talks about repentance, regeneration, or reformation and regeneration,
right,
as three main phases, but then you can break those down, and you've got your repentance where you actually have to kind of recognize, oh, there is this truth thing and this false thing, and I kind of want the true thing and not the false thing. So what's the false thing? Oh, it's in me, and I have to recognize that and rethink it, to repent from it.
Yes, I love the falsity. Like I was all about. I remember distinctly being 18 or something, starting to read Swedenborg earnestly, and there's a lot of stuff he was saying that I was like, that goes against sort of my main way that I feel cool about myself. Like but
cramping
now
my style.
It's cramped. My style is way cramped, but now I love that stuff. That same stuff that I used to not like is now my favorite.
Well, can I jump in there?
Yeah.
Where I'm going to use this labyrinth. We're going to talk about labyrinth later, but because it's a circle, right?
Let's go.
So we should talk about the hero cycle itself.
Okay.
Because what you're talking about, going against the grain, where the process of regeneration isn't, almost by definition, isn't comfortable, right?
Yeah.
You're taking ideas that you
don't
want to
believe.
believing. So one of the things you don't really understand Joseph Campbell very well if you are, being some purist about, there are 12 steps in the hero cycle, there are 24. Oh no, that's not really one of them. But one of the things I like particularly is that Campbell himself most often depicted the hero's journey not like a clock, which would be really easy to digest, and many people now picture it in that way.
Yeah.
1 o'clock. Oh, now we're crossing this first threshold. It's 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with understanding it that way, but he pictured it counterclockwise. And what we're talking about now, the reason was because you can't be a hero by going with the grain, right? You can't be, in terms of regeneration, you can't be, breaking down the parts of yourself that need to break down if you're going with what is comfortable. You have to go counter to what
Just a simple example, because in some ways I might go, well, why wouldn't I want to believe what's true versus what's false? But if I put it into the context of it's going to take hard work for me to actually be truly happy rather than just temporarily happy. And so that will to become truly happy has to overcome my unwillingness to do the work. And so the truth is I have to do the work. The falsity is I can just laze around and happiness will come to me. So there's an interesting thing where it's like, what I want to believe is false. Obviously.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think, I feel like, Swedenborg went on his own hero's journey that you can see outlined in a lot of detail, particularly in his Journal of Dreams, where he's kind of turning from who he used to be before his major regeneration into the guy who ended up kind of voicing all these books. And for him, he was his life consisted of outperforming everyone and looking for as much glory as he could get, and trying to be promoted to high positions. He was like very smart, very successful. And what he ended up running up against as God approached him was like, oh, that's actually the life of hell. Yeah. Me deriving my joy from being superior to people. And he actually goes in, like, he has certain dreams that are like, oh, I dreamed I was at a conference and somebody read a paper and I wish they had read mine instead. And it just like very relatable stuff. Everybody knows like, oh, people aren't recognizing my work. That used to be what joy was to him. And then he's like, oh no, actually there's this kingdom of heaven where the least is the greatest, where you're not supposed to want that's the kind of stuff that initially you're like, I'm not gonna do that. Why would I do that?
I love those parenthetical little snippets that you get from Swedenborg's own experience that come in the writings. One of them, he was sharing how when you enter into heaven, you can't really hide anything because that part of you, the external is taken off. So everything that's inside of you is exposed. And he said, I was afraid of this at first, but the more I was there, the more I got used to it, the more it was just a part of everything.
Dude.
I was just going to say the courage you're talking about also for Swedenborg on an individual level is pretty amazing when you talk about going against the grain. Yeah. You take figures like William Blake, Kant, where these were people who were truly grieved for whatever else was going on. These were admirers and colleagues that were grieving seeing in their mind Swedenborg with these incredible gifts going against the grain when he had already established himself, in so many ways, in so many fields.
That's a great point, because if anyone watching is not familiar, so Swedenborg was doing great. He'd published all this stuff on anatomy and physiology and mining and engineering. He was in House of Nobility, doing awesome, and then starts to write these embarrassing books, which are talking about theology, and I can talk to spirits and angels, and there's an internal sense to the Bible, and there's quite a lot of people who are like, unforced error.
Yeah,
unforced error, Swedenborg.
We talk about the letting go of his older personality, and I think there's a part of the worship and love of God that comes about right as he's making that changeover,
right,
where it's the most flourishy, beautiful Latin poetry, comparing that to the writings, which are very simple. And so I've heard from some people saying that perhaps that was Swedenborg's ego, just one last little, no, I can do that. I can publish written stuff that is beautiful and awesome, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
So psychologically, you use the word ego there. Psychologically, for both good and bad ways, the hero is the ego hero. So the hero has to go from, and we'll just jump back here. Yeah. We could take, actually, I guess we're this way. We could take Emanuel Swedenborg's hero journey. I wasn't thinking of taking it this way.
Me neither.
But a status quo, a known world. So somewhere in here, there's a line between the known world and the unknown world. Okay? So you have the ego that is the master of this known world. Mm. At some point, they're going to get a call to action, a call to the heroic journey. They're probably going to reject that call, right? Mm. You can think of Jonah, you can think of Moses, these biblical figures, but very often there's going to be this almost auditory call to action. They're going to reject that call, and the hero journey can only begin when they accept the call to adventure, Campbell says. So going along, we have the most, as it often happens, we have the most literal of barriers for Swedenborg, between the known world and the unknown world. We have a master scientist, good at everything he does.
Yep.
Top of his field.
We can relate.
Right?
We can all relate.
Going along, starting to go counterclockwise, answering this call to adventure, and we get some gateway guardians. We get a threshold between the known and unknown world. He's going to need to find a mentor, probably for Swedenborg. It's going to be Revelation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But
yes.
Revelation itself, trying to, at some point he's going to cross into this unknown world. He's going to find friends, find some enemies. He's going to go through some tests and battles, and he's going to approach what Campbell calls the inmost cave, or the belly of the whale, to reference, again, Jonah, or Jesus in the tomb, or Pinocchio. Again, you get these literal belly of the whale moments. Yep. There's going to be an ultimate crisis. This is also
Dark
often
night of the soul.
The dark night of the soul. This is the confrontation with the Father, with Darth Vader. We'll get into all this a little bit later on, but at a certain point, the hero is going to conquer his inner fears, right? So often that externalization is not what's most important. There's going to be an almost resurrection moment, right? And then there's going to be the beginnings of a return journey. But when crossing that threshold back into the known world, we don't perfectly, it's spiralic, right? We don't return, just like with regeneration, we don't return and go back to being exactly what we were.
Yeah.
We have a boon. We have a treasure we've taken, and, something, I've brought this back with me, and now I'm the master of two worlds, or more than likely, it's a small little victory, right? And you wake up the next morning, and that call to adventure is that alarm clock that you maybe hit snooze.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again.
What comes to mind there is what is said in the book of Revelation, "Behold, I make all things new." And what's fascinating about that whole journey is that you're ending up where you began, but it's not the same. It's all things are new, because what's changed is not necessarily the context of everything, but everything inside has changed, so everything around us is different or perceived to be different. And what once was kind of just a body is now a living being.
Yeah. You see it everywhere. You see it in nature. Right now, it's like shortest days of the year, but what happens is you go through the day-night cycle, and then you're back, it's 6 o'clock in the morning again, but every day it's like a little brighter, little days are a little longer. What I want to do is, I'm excited to break down, start to get into these stages in detail. Mm-hmm. Like, I love that overview. I want to read a quote from Swedenborg's Secrets of Heaven, where he talks about sort of this initial phase, the pre-journey phase. He says, before we can be reborn, we have to be equipped with everything instrumental to rebirth. So what are we taking in our pack? Good, joyful feelings serve the needs of our will, while truth from the Lord's word, along with support and confirmation from other sources, serves our intellectual needs. Till we receive this preparation, we cannot be regenerated. Those supplies are our food. That is why we cannot be regenerated before we reach adulthood. But we each have foods particularly appropriate to us that seem to be all our own, but the Lord provides us with them prior to our rebirth.
I have two things that jump to mind there. One is, I love that regeneration is a second adulthood journey. Mm-hmm. There's a crisis, but often in stories, it's the wider hero journey is, the hero is born, right? But that's a metaphor, right? So Campbell was not himself a Jungian or a Freudian, and that's sort of a split. But one way he was deeply Jungian was that where Freud focused almost entirely on the importance of events that happen in your earliest childhood and how they affect you, which is true, Jung broke away mostly in that he talks about the existential crisis of adulthood. So for Campbell, that's absolutely the hero journey that is most important, is when you break away from your parents' beliefs and your society's beliefs and start to develop your own. So it was this truly adult human journey. And if I may, I just want to read one quote. This is my ultimate favorite Campbell quote.
Well, if it's your ultimate favorite.
Yeah. So he says, "Full circle, from the tomb of the womb to the womb of the tomb we come, an ambiguous, enigmatical incursion into a world of solid matter that is soon to melt from us like the substance of a dream." So this hero's journey, happens in microcosm, it happens in macrocosm, right? That alarm clock that you snooze and say, no, now I am going to wake up. And or every moment, if you've got a partner in life, every moment that they do something that triggers you a little bit is a call to adventure to say, I'm not going to respond the way I want to, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to, and sometimes you refuse that
the call.
right?
Refuse the call.
Yeah.
Refuse the call,
No,
right?
but they did this and this and this. Yeah.
And then there's the year cycle. Maybe you're in this year of school and you're gonna try to face this new sport that you haven't played before. That's a hero's journey. Every day, every month, every year, a lifetime.
I love, you mentioned Jonah, and Campbell talks about Jonah a lot. Jonah is such a perfect example of this refusal of the call, because he runs the opposite direction as quickly and as far away as possible. The end of the known world was Tarshish, and he goes to Joppa, he gets on a ship, he pays to leave. He's like, I'm going to pay to get out of this call to adventure. He's spending his own money to escape. It's such a powerful thing. And the thing that he wants, what's interesting about Tarshish is that it's a place that represents wealth. It's where all of the merchant ships end up. So it's kind of the prize of our own intellect. I want to follow my own path and not be called to some other path that wasn't the one I was planning. We want what we believe. And so that refusal is based on what we want. And he is quick to say, I want my own path. And isn't that the most human element there? We need our own autonomy. And in Swedenborgian theology, freedom is the quintessential feature of the human character. And so the Lord has to protect that element of freedom. And yet in Genesis and in the Arcana Celestial, we read that that's kind of an appearance, that selfhood, that life comes from ourself can't be real, right? Yeah. The Lord is the source of all life. So we get to feel life as our own, and yet it's not quite our own. And so we see this really interesting situation where we're talking about awakening to a new thing, where Adam, it says that the Lord put him under a deep sleep.
Right.
And then takes this rib out. There's also the naming of these animals. What's all of that about? Yeah. Well, this is about coming to know what it is to be human. And part of that is that we actually, in order to have real life, we have to follow the direction that life takes us. And what's life other than the goodness and truth from the Lord? So that's the path. But I want this path, my own ideas. I want my autonomy, my own self.
It's a voluntary... The hero's journey or the regeneration thing is voluntary. You can go your whole life, at least as Swedenborg says, you can go your whole life refusing that call if you want to.
Asleep, yeah.
And this because what we're about to get into here, if we talk about this first stage, which is like call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting the mentor, that you can be alive and well and looking around and doing things, but you're so asleep in your self-centeredness and materialism that you haven't. Swedenborg says that the creation story hasn't even happened in you. Yeah, like the let there be light hadn't even started yet. I want to read. This is you were alluding to the stuff the stuff in Genesis being about our rebirth. So this is a quote right from the beginning of Secrets of Heaven, where it's quoting Genesis 1:3, where it says, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." That's not the creation of the universe. It's not even like when your life starts, but this is when your regeneration starts. It says, the first step is taken when we begin to realize that goodness and truth are something transcendent. So it's not, and I take that as like, I have to check, just because I like it or want it, doesn't mean it's true and good. I have to measure, there's something out there. It's not even like I recognize that it's alive and that it's God. There's something that's not me that I need, that I can strive toward. This is better than me. Something out there that's better than me. People who focus exclusively on externals do not even know what is good or what is true. Everything connected with self-love and love of worldly advantages they consider good. Anything that promotes these two loves they consider true. They are unaware that such goodness is evil and such truth false. When we are conceived anew, however, we first begin to be aware that our good is not good. Which I feel like if you take that to the extreme, you would call somebody a narcissist. If when there's a problem, I just got my 7th divorce and it was her fault. Just like all the other ones were her fault. Or I go into work and it's like, I guess all my bosses and my coworkers are out to get me all the time. Never looking to see like, am I bringing something to this situation?
What's the common denominator?
Yeah. So what do you guys think about that?
So I love that the Garden of Eden is so obviously a womb state, right? Many forms of Christianity focus heavily on Eve and the original sin, right? The eating of the apple. But it's also obviously according to Swedenborg, a womb state where you are not truly living yet, not in a chosen sort of way, not in an adventure of regeneration. And so that is being born into the world as being cast out of Eden. And we can finish the whole bookend by returning to paradise, but it's 3-dimensional now, and we get to the holy city, New Jerusalem, at the very end of the Bible. There's a symmetry there that hopefully we'll talk about a little.
Innocence and then the innocence of wisdom.
Right. Innocence of ignorance moving to the chosen innocence of wisdom.
Yeah, like when you're a little kid, you got a lot of heavenly. You have a lot of heavenly qualities. You just hang out. I just was watching, like everyone does, some little short videos of kids doing super cute things. Like there was this little tiny I don't know. They're like 2 years old or less, and the one little girl accidentally hurts the little boy, and he's like, I can't, and he's mad, and he's going away, and she's trying to hug him, and at first he's like, no, but then he sees that she's sad, she can't hug him. He's like, okay, and they hug it out. Super cute. However, it's not. It's involuntary. It's not actual, according to Swedenborg, it's not actual innocence because you have to be there, but you get around to the end of your life to like adopt some of those same qualities, but voluntary, and yeah.
The whole story through Genesis and Adam and Eve is such a fascinating bit, especially when we look at it in the original language in the Hebrew, because Adam isn't male person, man, it's human being Adam, who is also that word is also the word for dust and earth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, we're talking about all human beings are Adam, and then male and female, they're created, and we have this story of Eve, who isn't named in this earlier part. It's later on that she's named as Eve. She's Ish, and there's Ish and Isha, husband and wife, male and female, until after she becomes bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, then she's named Eve, the mother of all living. So there's this interesting process that's taking place in Adam, human being, all of us, to take us from a state where we're kind of ignorant of what it is to be human. So then the Lord comes along, and there's no helper found that's comparable to him, is the word in Genesis. And so the Lord brings him the animals, and he sits there and gets to name the animals. It's going, I understand this aspect of humanity. So we name those things. And we do this with land formations. We do this with animals. We do this with everything. We name things when we understand them. And then sometimes we forget what they mean after we have a name. But that's a different point.
But you could, but like you could,
please interrupt.
You could, for example, if I'm going with my blinders on and I don't realize that I have these destructive ways that I act in, but then someone can point out, like you have a problem with your temper.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that animal is named, where I stop just like, I'm here, so I'm doing this, and now I know, I have my temper's kicked up, and I need to not do this. That's like naming some animal. You understand the quality of this thing within you, and you understand this is not just me seeing the world as it is. This is me getting a distorted view. I have a problem here that needs to be fixed. Yeah. That animal's named.
Yeah, and it's that is actually called the Rumpelstiltskin effect in a positive way.
Yeah,
is something where when you name a problem in your life, it takes away its power, like the fairy tale. So in a way, there's kind of the coming to understand the human bit, and then there is the refusal of certain parts of that in this story, where Adam falls asleep in the end that we mentioned. Now, when the Lord comes down over the garden after they are aware, after they eat of the tree and they have these knowledges of what it is to be human, and there are certain parts of their humanity they're ashamed of. And God comes down as if he doesn't know what's going on and says, "Hey, where are you guys at? Are you hiding?" And yeah, they're hiding from God. There's this weird shame in recognizing that there are parts of us that we want to hold on to that we also know don't fit with the way that God necessarily intends. So there's a mention of not accepting or that all of the good that we think is good is actually evil, and that's like a striking thing. I don't want that. What are you talking about? What I think is good is.
When I first heard that, I was like, "What do you even? Who do you think you are saying that about me?" To Swedenborg.
So the funny thing is God knows that that's what our reaction is.
Yeah.
And so
He
his
knows Jonah's gonna
obliviousness,
respond that way.
Yeah.
his obliviousness to Adam and Eve and where they are in the garden and going, "Where are you?"
Yeah. You know what I think that's like? And then I'll go to you. This is frivolous. It's like those videos when somebody comes home and the dog has destroyed their couch, and they're like, "Do you know who did this?" And you look around, and one dog is just like there, and the other dog is like quivering and like, "I know I've done something wrong," but the person doesn't like accuse them. They're just like, "Did anyone do this?" I don't know if you've seen those.
Well,
but,
I mean, I think that's exactly what we're talking about, because the metaphor is, of course, we are that before regeneration. On a spiritual level, we are that dog who, do you know it's me? Well, it's Cain and Abel, right? You know,
Am I my brother's keeper?
Am I my brother's keeper? You know, it's so clear. But Campbell has a brilliant metaphor for that. Again, we're talking about not even adulthood. We're talking about second adulthood.
Yeah.
When you really truly start to go against the grain of yourself. He talks about us as, he wouldn't use the word spiritual, perhaps. I mean, he does, but we are social. Humans are social or spiritual marsupials. What he means by that is a sea turtle is born, and he uses this precise example, is born with an innocent wisdom, right? With instinct. It's born on a beach. There are seagulls. There are sharks. But that turtle instantly knows to head toward the ocean in a desperate, it cracks out of its shell and knows, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
On a literal level, humans are born absolutely helpless as babies. They have to be protected by a second womb of society, of their mother, or they will not survive. Not so with sea turtles, right? But it goes beyond that, right? That second womb. So like a marsupial, a kangaroo that is born unready for the world, and it crawls into a second womb. Campbell calls it a womb with a view.
Yeah.
So here we have this womb with a view for humans is way further. We've moved so far. We've eaten of the apple so long ago that our instincts have really, they're not gone, but they really and truly are far diminished from that sea turtle. Mm-hmm. We have to learn from society, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, from Revelation. We have to learn from generations before how to survive in this world, but also how to progress as humans. Okay. And that's what this regeneration pattern, that's what this hero's journey is we're talking 20, we're still in that second womb, 22 plus years, and some people live out their whole lives in that second womb.
You pointed at me when you said that. So, and crucially, the instinct that we lack, according to Swedenborg, is how to be good. You don't know how to be good because you think until you get the call and you accept it, you think all this stuff that's actually your selfishness is the good. Mm-hmm. So,
can we come back to that quote, the Swedenborg one here?
Yeah.
The things are our food, the goods and truths that the Lord provides them to us prior to our rebirth.
Yeah.
Is fascinating to think about when we talk about instinct, because it's not instinct. Where does it come from? And the writings talk a lot about how the Lord is quietly instilling remnant states of goodness and truth throughout our childhood and throughout our life, and that those are the things that he draws upon when we're going into spiritual crisis. So one of the other spots I was talking about how it's basically our love for the Lord and our love for the neighbor that makes that shift over where truth becomes real truth and good becomes real good. And going back to Jonah, what's the thing that changes? He's actually a little bit concerned for the other people on the ship. He's the problem.
Yeah.
He gets on, and there's this crazy thing. He's asleep in the bottom of the boat and asleep again. That's an interesting thing when we're talking about this awakening.
Yep.
When they come and wake him up, and he's realizing, oh, this is God's doing this to me. This is my fault. He feels bad for the people and says, you got to throw me in.
Yeah.
And they eventually, after trying to throw everything else, all of their cargo, they wasted everything wanting to save Jonah. Eventually, they're like, okay.
And why didn't he
And that's
want?
when his
That's when
hero
his-
journey begins. He's crossing
Yeah.
the threshold literally into the water, heading toward the belly of the whale.
So there must have been some little remnant state that the Lord put in Jonah to go, you should prioritize their safety over your own protection of yourself in this situation, because you're just running away.
And why didn't he want to go to Nineveh in the first place? Because he was only thinking about himself. He was thinking, they're not going to like me there. I might get hurt. He wasn't at all thinking, oh, these people have lost their way so much that if I don't deliver this message, what kind of harm is going to come to them? But I love the remnant, the storing up that Swedenborg talks about, because always, if you're going to be Bilbo or Frodo in the Lord of the Rings, you got your your mithril, you got your little somethings that you pack
arming
up.
of the hero.
You've got that, and for us, the things that the Lord's packing up for us before we go, it's like when you were a little kid and you love your siblings or you love your friends, remember, or you love your mom and dad. That feeling, I'm storing that up in your pack because later we're gonna need to pull that out and use it, or all the good stuff in you. It's like being squirreled away for the start
Kind
of
of tells us how much the early childhood stuff that psychologists focus on actually has a meaning.
Right. So two things. One is when it's because once the hero journey has begun, once you've crossed the threshold, just like the curse of Adam, right? Now or curse of Eve. Now you were in paradise and you were being encouraged to eat of every tree, gain all these remnants that are going to be needed for sustenance later on, because it's going to be a lot harder. Now you're heading into the wilderness. So the children of Israel stocking up before leaving to the crossing that threshold. But Adam and Eve, now having children is going to be painful and dangerous. Now the earth isn't just going to produce food. You're going to have a social structure that teaches you how to get grain and how to make it into bread. Those are things that were irrelevant in the womb-like state of paradise.
Yeah.
Because when we're trying to regenerate, it's not so easy to just absorb things that you don't want to absorb because they're hard.
So this is a little passage from Swedenborg that I think parallels this refusal of the call. This is from Secrets of Heaven 33:21. It says, our rational part can adapt to truth and accept it before our earthly part can, as is plain from the fact that in a person who is regenerating, the rational self fights a lot with the earthly self. Or in other words, the inner self fights with the outer. The inner self can see truth and also form an intent to act on it, while the outer self refuses and resists. And I feel like that's me, because I've got this. I sit here on this show all day and talk about these amazing insights from Swedenborg, and I'll get in this groove where these are treasures and I'm holding on to these. I want to live by them, and then also it'll be like, well, I'm gonna ignore that, or I'm just gonna dive into this like superficial stuff, and then I always feel like, why am I doing that? I don't want to be doing that. I want to be doing this. There's this constant, like, it's not just one refusal. It's like, today I'm refusing between 4 and 5 p.m. and then I'm gonna, that really happens.
Yeah, just to add some story flavor here, this is where, more than the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit is just perfect. Bilbo Baggins, repeatedly says, I don't want any, I'm a good, respectable hobbit. I don't want any adventures, takes pride in the refusal of the call.
Yeah.
Even Harry Potter, just saying, I can't be a wizard. I'm just Harry.
Yeah.
A famous little
Yeah.
line, right? It's this natural refusal to go from something even though it's not paradise, really.
Well, to put it into a context that is completely universal, I think. Journeys that we all have to face in certain ways, like the fact that life goes on after this body dies. That's at least the way I view it now. But there's a time period where there's a lot of doubt, and when people die physically, there's a grieving of that person, and that's something that I've dealt with a lot in life, and I know a lot of people struggle with grief. And this is a hero's journey moment, and there's a lot of me that just wants to go hide.
Yeah.
And go, I don't like this new world where these people aren't present in front of me. And that's a new world that I just don't want I don't have interest in it. And the interesting part here to me is it's a false belief.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, no, this life goes on forever.
Yep.
But it's not something that I've completely embodied until I probably go into this state of like refusing the call and then realizing, well, in order to live, I kind of have to get out of my hole.
I was doing that. So we bought our daughter a dog a few years back, and when she was like 6. And the dog, it turns out, had this liver shunt, and it was going to die. And I was like, no way are we going to teach her about death now. We're not doing that. So I was like, pull out all the stops. Like we love the dog too, of course. We ended up getting surgery on it, and it's okay. And it was free. No, I'm just kidding. but what I'm saying is I felt that refusal. I don't want her to, because I suffered a loss in my life when I was that same age. So my sister died when I was young. So I really had this feeling of like, I don't want to teach her about death then. So what can we do to delay this entry into that? But as you start to get older, there's no avoiding it.
And there are times where I've actually thought about that particular thing about young people and dealing with death. And I've been a school director, and with classroom pets, they eventually die. And so you end up having classroom funerals for the pets. And how do you use that as a wonderful opportunity to share that our memories and our the thoughts that we have, our affections for this animal will live on forever, and the Lord, that His life goes on forever. And how do you use those challenges early on in life to help us when our siblings pass? Or my uncle just passed 2 days ago, and it's a sad thing. And there's a way that we can reflect on it differently after we've gone through this journey and come to that new awareness of, life goes on, and there's something about this world as a womb, a second womb that is going on. And I think that's the connection to Swedenborg and regeneration. This earth is our opportunity to be reborn according to kind of a combination of our own will and what God's will is.
Yeah, the womb of the tomb to the tomb of the womb. Talk about that sustenance that you get no matter what. That's why we have these stories. And I don't just mean these stories from the Bible. I do mean, the Lord of the Rings and the Hunger Games and all these stories, even fairy tales. I don't even think it is purely a religious paradigm. Atheists, people from all walks of life need to have an understanding that something continues, that the cycle finishes. And so that there will be hardship. And again, that's why we are given this microcosm and macrocosm system, this cyclical, that if we never experienced individual days where the sun goes down and we go to sleep, if we weren't given that as a micro cycle, how would we ever face the great hero's journey, right? When we are not given, we're never thrown a bone when it comes to actual death. Right. Whether you are religious, atheist, Christian, Buddhist, whatever, it doesn't matter how deep your faith is. We are never truly given now you don't have to have any more questions about this, right?
It hurts. No matter what.
It hurts.
No matter what, it hurts. And I want to move on to stage 2, but before I do, it just struck me listening to you guys talking about how it shows up in all these different stories. Isn't it strange that according to Swedenborg and according to a lot of people who believe that the Bible is this like really central revelation from God, why is it a story? Why is most of it this story and the story of a particular group of people who go, but to say, oh, this is how God speaks to people in all these different ways, and even the stories that come through in pop culture, it's there's trying to be truth communicated. Oh, that's more of a context. Like it makes it. Oh, the story is how you teach people. Yeah.
So this is where meeting the mentor, and so before
right.
jumping to stage 2, the mentor. Some Campbell purists think, you meet the mentor after crossing the threshold. That's all nonsense. The point is, you need guidance in the unknown world.
Yeah.
So this would be Dumbledore or Obi-Wan Kenobi. This would be Gandalf, often bearded. Yoda, right? That there are, and in this case, I think we'd all agree that this would be at its deepest. Yes, you can meet real mentors, people that have been through pain and can show you the way. But there's also just revelation in general. This is why this happens, why we are given stories, the doctrines. These are ways that we can prime ourselves before and prepare ourselves, arm ourselves for this journey.
Swedenborg's mentor was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Well, the way he tells the story, he had this early experience where he had started to have some spiritual experiences and some weird things happened, but then he had just a full-blown encounter with Jesus, who talked to him and comforted him and even did a sort of an inside joke with him about the time when he jumped ship, the Swedenborg jumped ship in the plague and almost got executed for it. But then Swedenborg will say in letters later, I met Jesus then, but then he's been with me continually through his presence in the Word. So that was, somehow something got opened up and God was like showing Swedenborg, this is what this all means. This is how you navigate the spiritual world for him. So there's very, very literally, there was a pretty good mentor for Swedenborg there. Okay, so the second stage is crossing the threshold, tests and allies and enemies, approaching the inmost cave. Yeah. Okay. So we're at backwards 3 o'clock.
That's right.
9 o'clock.
Let me open it up, the conversation on this with another number from Swedenborg. This is Secrets of Heaven 3175. As long as it confines itself to the memory, truth is merely knowledge. If it is to permeate us, it has to be called up from there and born deep within. After all, our humanity lies deep within, in our rational mind. Unless we are rational, we're not human. We cannot possibly be rational unless we have goodness. Interesting to link goodness and what you think, what's goodness have to do with? But the goodness that sets us apart from animals is to love God and love our neighbor. This is the source of all human goodness. Such goodness is what truth needs to be introduced into and unite within our rational mind. Truth is introduced and united to goodness. How do you do it? When we love God and love our neighbor. Because truth then takes up residence in goodness. And truth looks to goodness as its ultimate aim and its soul, and so is the source of its life. So it's a changing of, I may have heard concepts to, these are marching orders that lead me toward actually amending, or making me act like a better human.
Well, and doesn't this mirror the way we think about education for children? If we really think that the test that we give them on spelling is the important thing, then we're missing what the point of education is.
Right.
We want people to be able to spell so that when they're trying to communicate through writing, other people will understand what they mean, because spelling can matter. Grammar can matter. So we think about those things not from the standpoint of you have to get it right or else, because that's kind of missing the point. The point is, can you communicate effectively the words that you want to in writing? And I love thinking about I think that Swedenborg and also Maria Montessori speaks a lot about how early in childhood, it's actually like our soul is reaching out through the body as a tool into the universe to grab what it is, and see and sense and feel and touch and taste everything that is around it, to understand our relationship from our soul to its environment. And then we do need direction on what's actually good, because if we're just grabbing and going, I like this, we're going to keep grabbing our ice cream and eating our ice cream and eating our ice cream and just not actually enjoying life. We have to start enacting the things that we learn and putting them into useful context. And it's not just for self. How do we do it? Well, we love the Lord and we love our neighbor. That's the transition, is when we go, oh, these things I find in my environment are things that I can use to make you happy and make you happy.
Yeah.
Well,
And that, in effect, will make much more of a difference.
And those are those things are all well and good within the classroom. That's why Egypt corresponds to education, right? That's the beginning that is being escaped. That's the known world for the children of Israel, right? When being led by Moses, you can get into a echo chamber with that. Oh, I know these things, but you're not testing your mettle in any way. So the crossing of the threshold, again, with this stuff, these stages are named based off of mythological motifs, and in some cases biblical motifs. So it's not dogma, it's literally descriptive in some ways. So that threshold, we're not in Kansas anymore. We've fallen down the rabbit hole.
Yep.
We're through the looking glass. This is the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea.
I think, and the Lord of the Rings, I'm thinking of the movie where Sam says,
I love
if we take one more step, this is the first time we'll be farther from home than I've ever been. Remember that part? And they're in like some little field.
And they cross that threshold, and
Yep.
then I don't want to get too much into it, but there's even a motif that happens a lot, the cantina from Star Wars.
Yeah.
With the music, where you first start to see people that don't look like you. There's a halfway house is another way of referring to it. So there they go to the prancing pony in The Lord of the Rings, right? Where there are hobbits, but there are also big people, right? So this is where we leave school, we graduate, we cross the Red Sea. Jesus is baptized by John. Again, there's a river. And after that point, that's when the ministry begins. That's when the adventure really begins.
After he gets baptized by John, I hope I have this right, but I think right after that in one of the Gospels, it says, from that day forward, Jesus went out preaching, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Something about, I'm getting goosebumps right now just saying that. Something about that is like, we flipped a switch. Like, something's going on here. Man, it's just, it's powerful.
And my whole dissertation was about an archetypal character. John the Baptist was one that I call the foreshadow, but John the Baptist is an example of this. And as revelation, as the mentor, whatever you want to call his role there, it's not just, from that moment on for Jesus. John the Baptist's role has been performed. He runs off to get decapitated, basically, right? Like he is an egoless figure. He has served his purpose in ferrying Jesus across the Jordan, per se, into his ministry. So that's the role of the mentor. And yes, sometimes Gandalf returns in some other form, but it's usually in that inner, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi as a spectral form.
It's such an important thing what John says, John the Baptist says when some of his disciples come, because Jesus' disciples are now baptizing. And they're getting upset. And he's like, this is exactly what's supposed to happen. I'm not the one. I've said that since the beginning. It's him. I must decrease. He must increase. And it's the same thing about our transition from gaining the tools and the knowledge and the goods and truths that we need to live, and then to actually live those things. I think about my own process in education to become a pastor, and it's an intense schooling for several years to do that, and there's a joy in it because I love studying these books. I love just reading through the theology and just going, these pieces fit together so beautifully, and I can paint pictures about it. Yeah. But that doesn't do anything for the relationships that I have with other people unless I start embodying those ideas. And what to me helps me want to embody it is when I see other people doing it. And so, for instance, I bring this story up kind of as an example of this. I know this lady in England who came to conserve a first edition of Heaven and Hell that I found in a closet that was preserved from mold over top and mold down below.
Wow.
And it was just this first edition of Heaven and Hell sitting there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need to find somebody to conserve this. So I called this archivist, and they said, this person's the person. She's the best. So these two little Italian ladies, Danila is the name that I remember, are sitting there bouncing around and talking in Italian. And they're talking about the paper, not about the theology.
Right.
But their excitement about the quality of the paper and how to take care of it and all of the details they knew about that paper. They obviously knew about paper, but they were doing something with it. And for me to see their love being enacted before me, even in a different language, makes me want to go, okay, what's in me that's just knowledge that maybe I wouldn't think would be exciting, but I can put it out there and somebody else might see it.
We do a group, like we call it, community chat. So people who have become members of the Swedenborg Foundation, which you all can, by the way, we meet like once a month and just do video chat. And usually I'll just ask how things are going in people's spiritual lives and what they're doing. And whenever I hear about people using the concepts in Swedenborg to kind of guide how their life goes, I got to up my game. I forgot you really can use this stuff because I'm so used to talking about it. So I feel some of that same, it like jolts me awake. But also with this, you've got these stages of the mentor has to then go away. You've got to take this truth and bring it to life. So much of Swedenborg's Secrets of Heaven is talking about Jesus going through that process. He'll go on at length about this story about grief in the Old Testament is about Jesus's grief and having like a version of what you just said, where he thinks he's just gathering these ideas for the pleasure he finds in them, but actually they've got to sort of die in a way because he's got to use them instead. And it all would seem very abstract and strange, but you can start to tease apart, this happens in my life. This has happened at different times for me. I'm living my own little version of the great story.
One of the most fascinating lines in the whole of the Gospels to me is the short line about Jesus growing in wisdom. It's right as he's a boy, right, basically. It just references, and he grew in strength and wisdom or something along those lines. And it's just a very short snippet of what's happening to the Lord. It's kind of weird to think of God in a human form, but there's development there.
Yeah.
He's showing us that same development that's in all humanity by actually taking on the human form and going through every bit of the process with us.
Yeah. Let me read something about this phase, and then I want to talk about the inmost cave, approaching it. But this is from Secrets of Heaven again. He said, "It is hard to detach truth from the earthly self and raise it from that level to the rational plane. Our earthly self contains misconceptions, cravings for evil, and a convinced belief in falsity. So long as these are present and attach themselves to truth, so long our earthly self holds truth back, not allowing it to rise up to that level, from that level to the rational plane. However, as soon as the Lord detaches our evil cravings and false convictions, and therefore our misconceptions, and goodness causes us to start loathing arguments against truth and laughing at doubts about it, truth has reached the stage for leaving the earthly self. Then it is time for truth to rise up into our rational mind and clothe itself in a state of goodness." So it's like, why do you need to go on the journey in the first place? Can't you just stay where you started? The problem is there's all this stuff in our first state that would smother and destroy the goodness and truth that God's trying to introduce in there. Yeah. So you have to step out in order to free yourself from that so that you can rise here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and those things have a difference. Those truths that you're gaining there. Again, the arming or the dressing of the hero. Mithril coat for Frodo, a wand for Harry. The garments for this journey that you need, I believe, are of a different quality than that nourishment that happened in the Garden of Eden, right? Those are important. They get you ready. But now we're talking about handheld tools that you are starting to, for yourself, use, right? I don't know whether there's a God, but I do know that I love my family, right?
Yes.
The very particular things that you say, I'm questioning this, I'm questioning everything still, but at least I can reach out and grab onto this truth. I think that's of a different quality, and it's sorry to keep using these examples, but it's Harry meeting Hermione and Ron. It's Frodo finding his Sam and Pippin and right.
Yep.
It's starting to get a group of people around you, because in a very literal way, as we head into second adulthood, the people you choose to be around start to have a real effect on you, and you have to start seeing that as part of your own journey. Yeah.
We mentioned kind of at the beginning the difference between animal and human, kind of having to do with instinctual knowledge versus kind of blank slate type of thing. But Swedenborg doesn't talk about us being a blank slate in that, not being instinct, but that we are born with hereditary inclinations of every kind, good and evil. But he focuses a lot more on the hereditary evil part.
Come on, man.
I know.
Give us a break.
In the process of regeneration, that repentance part of coming to recognize those things that maybe aren't so useful, and then being able to come to see the rational things as true, it's such a hard part of our journey, because it's like, why would I want to change? I think that's one of the struggles that we have, is until we come to a point where we accept that what I already know, or what I already believe, or what I already am trying to do isn't working, that it's not necessarily fixing everything, or the problems persist, or I'm causing more problems. Until we get to that point of breaking, we're not going to look for a new answer. And so in a weird way, the Lord allows those hereditary inclinations to fester in us, in our natural humanity, so that when we come to a state of wanting something more that is good, we can then reevaluate. So you're talking about the system, that, well, I don't know this thing, but I do know I love my family.
Right.
With theology, I think it's a very similar thing. I don't know a whole lot about necessarily what the Bible is going to tell me in the end, but I've built a trust in the Lord that he's going to tell me the truth. So I might not understand all of these things or the weird correspondences, but I'm going to trust that this is true because I believe it comes from God. And then we can structure our lives around it, even though we don't necessarily fully rationally believe all of those things. And I think that in the Bible, this comes across in the very ritualistic nature of the Israelites, and how they were told to build the temple this way and to do these things that way. And when they did, everything would be prosperous. It's a part of our gaining of confidence. Yeah. It's the knowledge that when we do follow this path, it's going to result in the right things. When we don't, it won't. And that's how we come out of that state of not knowing any truth to being willing to see truth, to then wanting to know the truth so that it'll help us live well.
And there's a reason for all this, which is that we are approaching the inmost cave.
Let's talk about that. Yeah. So what's the cave?
Okay, so the inmost cave, Campbell says, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. So I'll leave it to you two to talk about regeneration, probably. But in this case, there's a boon, there's a treasure, there's an internal salve that you need. We've said it before, no one gets through this life unscathed. It isn't just these little trip ups and challenges with little schoolyard bullies. We are heading toward crisis in our lives, right? That's the crisis of our parents dying. That's the crisis of, the existential crisis of not knowing, having a progressing upward. I'm getting stronger. I'm getting smarter. And then suddenly at a certain point, your physical vessel starts to go the opposite direction.
Tell me about it.
How do we deal with that, right? So the inmost cave, the belly of the whale moment, the long night of the soul, or the dark night of the soul. These are all metaphors in every culture with different names for this existential crisis or crises, right, that we're all heading toward. And this is what we're being prepared for, because we need to have our confidence built up a bit against these smaller little challenges in this unknown world we've entered. Yeah. I'd love you to talk about that from a Swedenborgian standpoint. What is this stage?
Let's go. Well, two things pop to mind. One is temptation, or what are sometimes translated spiritual crises. These are these dark nights of the soul that you have to go through in order to progress. And within that, like the sort of, I feel like the cave you're entering is when you start to look at your own will. So you have the intellect, which is your ideas, but then you have your will. I want to read this, and then Alan, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But this is about this is the hard part of this journey within. This is from his book True Christianity. It says, the reason why true repentance is to examine not only the actions of our life, but also the intentions of our will, is that our intellect and our will produce actions. We explore the intentions of our will by exploring our thoughts. Our intentions reveal themselves in our thoughts. For example, when we contemplate, will, and intend acts of revenge, adultery, theft, or false witness, or entertain desires for those things. So the easy part might be like, all right, I'm not doing any of this stuff. You look at my life, if on a closed circuit TV camera, look, I'm not doing anything. But the hard part is like, would I, if I could get away with it? And what kind of stuff am I harboring in myself? Like that's, to me, that feels like, oh, that's a cave. Like, what am I going to discover if I go in there?
And it's also a hard question to answer. We can think about something all day long and go, would I do this, that, or the other thing? And until we are actually in the moment, we don't know. I used to work in London, and the area we were in wasn't it had some crime issues. So there were times where I'd be a little nervous walking back to the train station, but I'm a bigger person and could also have a hero complex at times. Yeah. So there are parts of me that fantasize about what if somebody over there is being hurt by somebody else. Yeah. Would I actually step in and help? Yes. How could I step in and help? And, I can fantasize about that all day long. Unless it happens, I don't know if I would just turn and run the other direction or if I'd actually step in. Yeah. And so it's a fascinating thing. We can think about these things a lot, but until the opportunities present themselves, we really don't know. And this is one of the things about Swedenborgian philosophy or theology that I think is awesome. He talks a lot about, if the opportunity presents itself, would you act in this way or that way? And in some ways, it means that if it were, the opportunity to do something good were to present itself, and you would actually do it, in a way, it's already a part of you, and you've done it. Yeah. Spiritually. And that's the same thing with evil. If there's a part of it that's attached to us where if the opportunity presents itself and there was no fear, no jail, my wife's not going to find about this thing or whatever it is that allows us to act in a way that we know is wrong, then we've already done it in our spirit. So the Lord says, he who looks upon another woman with an intent has already committed adultery in his heart. And that sounds so harsh because it's hard.
Well, it's like, because your mind is just like a runaway.
Our mind looks at things and goes, that's beautiful, or that's attractive, and then it takes it and does what it does. And, well, it's because we're not just influenced by God.
Right.
we're influenced by good and evil spirits as kind of this intermediate space where we get to tune in to the people that or the spirits that we want to hear.
Yeah.
And so
Heaven and hell.
it's amazing when that changeover happens, where it's not just those are my thoughts, thinking, why shouldn't I just run that guy off the road that cut me off? I'm not actually going to do that, even if the opportunity presented itself, because it has,
Yeah, that's right.
But I have those thoughts. Where are they coming from? Well, hell, really.
Yep.
And so now, at this point, I can know that's not my thought. Stupid. Go back to hell.
It's an interesting. There's an interesting, I guess, duality to it. Where, Swedenborg will talk about. There's one tool that he gives you is if you have running thoughts. I was just this morning before this show. I went to a place to pick up some breakfast, and I just was when I was getting into my car. I was like, man, it's like I'm in touch with every hell that there is. Like just the thoughts I was having about everybody at that place. And it's not even like I'm not even intending these, but just like, oh, that person's stupid because they're doing this. I would do this way better than that person. Just like going, and I feel like, man, okay, I don't need to get too entangled in that. That just comes out of hell. So you don't want to do too much of that. But then on the other hand, you want to look in your will, and you tend to gloss over what's really there. So I'll give you a silly example, but people will on YouTube, they'll write comments to us and to me that are insulting.
No.
And I'm serious. You'd think like, well, how can you insult perfection? But so I would, and especially earlier on, like I would be more fazed by those when they come along. And I was like, I would never do that. People who are like that, like what's wrong with these psychopaths that would like watch somebody and just want to reach out? But a few times when I've come across a YouTube video that I really don't like, when I believe the information you're putting out is a threat to the world, I could feel this urge and like, I know what I would say to that guy to try to derail him. And I'm like, dude, so that might be a case where like you sit with that and you really look in, is the root, which is that I hold others in contempt in comparison with myself, or you could maybe do a little inmost caving there. Like what's really in there?
So can I just, this is fascinating, Campbell's intuition here, or his studiousness, that this is the belly of the whale, or the inmost cave. It's not the ultimate baddie, and sometimes they overlap. But notice how much, when we're talking about mythology, when we're talking about stories, we so often are thinking of them as vibrant, literalized output about deeper internal things. And yet here, even in these stories, it's so rarely in this belly of the whale moment. The actual crisis is not Luke facing Darth Vader, right? It's him, spoiler alert, acknowledging his true parenthood, right? That's the crisis. It's not the battle there. It's not Frodo fighting with his big hero, even though we're in the most externalized version. It's not Frodo fighting with a big sword against Sauron. It is him at Mount Doom fighting, can I, and he fails, can I throw this
Spoiler
ring?
alert.
Can I throw this ring in there? So the dark night of the soul is, even going back as far as Gilgamesh and Beowulf, we're talking about an internal battle that is the Garden of Gethsemane, right? It's the dark night of the soul. Jesus saying, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, right? He defeats that in that moment, right? And it's not easy, even for him.
And from that moment on, everything is different and it can't go back. It's kind of another threshold.
Right. The crucifix is not the ultimate. That's what I think a lot of forms of Christianity misunderstand. The crucifix is not the dark night of the soul, right? It's not easy. It's not a cakewalk, but he's already acknowledged he's already fought that battle.
I think there are big versions of this, and there are little versions of this in all of our lives. There's the big version, which is we have perhaps a dark night of the soul at some point where we really do turn a point to go, I'm going to focus more on goodness and truth and my neighbor and the Lord than on myself and on my own interests. that's a big dark night of the soul somehow happens in the course of our life in different ways and over time. What's fascinating to me, thinking about this from Swedenborg, he talks about how every angel maintains the humility they have because they all remember and recognize the fallen state from which they came.
Right.
And so what an interesting thing to say. It's like the angels get to remember the terrible stuff they came from. Yeah, because the glory of the Lord is so awesome, and they've bought into it so much. There's something that changed over that made that mindset more angelic.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take away the experience that they went through to get to that point. The experience was so vital.
It is, and I can already see the utility in it. Swedenborg hammers again and again and again on how we have all this evil and falsity within us, and if you were left to your own devices and God wasn't sitting there tractor beaming you up toward heaven to the extent that he can, we would rush into all of our most base, most vile desires. You ain't seen it yet because he hasn't ever lifted those safeguards, but you'd go in on it. And at first you think, hey man, that's it. But then as you start to see what the actual conflict is, which is again, you against the darkness inside you, because that darkness inside you is what's going to ruin all your happiness. Actually, that becomes this great boon, because the darkness inside you, what it feeds off of is your sense, in a lot of cases, in your sense that you're superior to other people and that you want to control them and all that because it's you and you're. But if you know, oh, I have all these issues, and without God, I wouldn't be anything. You look at the impact that has on how you see other people, and it's sort of like, hey, we're all in this together. It just changes you. It changes you right away. It's this enzyme that catalyzes this, like, it frees you. And like I welcome it now, because what it does is gets me out of the clutches of my own ego.
What's the quote from Campbell about where when we enter into the cave where we had thought to slay another, we slay ourselves?
I should look that up. But so this it's you got it pretty darn close.
Internet, fact check us.
Yeah, it's the ego is going into the cave, and where you had thought to slay another or the beast, you will only slay yourself. Where you had thought to be alone, you are with all the world.
That's great.
Hey, do you want the message in this video to reach the world? Your donation can make it happen. We here at the Swedenborg Foundation are a not-for-profit, so we can only do what we do, reach the people we reach, spread the message we spread because of donations like the one that maybe you're going to give us. Click the link in the description. Any contribution size helps. Back to the show.
Okay, let's talk about stage 3, which we talked a bit about, the dark night of the soul, but I think this is in there. The ordeal, the reward, the road back. It's something that we all go through. I want to open with something from New Jerusalem, Swedenborg's New Jerusalem. He says, only people who are being regenerated experience spiritual crises, because spiritual crises are times of mental anguish for people whose lives are devoted to goodness and truth. These crises are brought about by evil spirits. Dun, dun, dun. And so this is how they do it. When they stir up the evils in us, and anxiety wells up inside, that is a symptom of our spiritual crisis. What is at stake in crises of the spirit is either the dominance of goodness over evil, or the dominance of evil over goodness. The evil that wants to take control is in our earthly or outer self, and the goodness is in our spiritual or inner self. You can be going through this and not even know that that's what's happening. But I don't know. There sounds like some stakes there, right?
Yeah. For some reason, when you were reading that, it brought up a moment where I feel like I had like a tweak in my spirit where something went, oh, this is one of those moments to live into this. And I had just finished up a memorial service for a person I didn't know, and it was families that I didn't know. It was a good hour away from where I lived. So it was an outdoor service, and then there's a reception, and somebody comes over to me to tell me, nice service, but too bad you're wrong about the afterlife.
Yeah.
And there's a big part of me that wants to defend my theology, my ideas, my understanding of this, and how dare you.
Yeah.
There's that part of me that wants to fight back in a way. But can I look at what's really good here and what's at stake and realize this isn't the moment for me to prove this guy wrong, to quote scripture at him. It's just a funeral for mourning and grieving. And so anyways, there's interesting things where I've experienced over time the part of me that wants to and had in the past gone, no, I'm smarter, I've got this, I've studied this stuff. And then there's the part of, no, but what's good here? Does bringing all that knowledge to bear right now actually help the circumstance, or is that just me building my ego or defending something? So anyways, crises come in lots of different forms, but it is that pursuit of goodness that makes the difference, because I can put that off, that idea of what's really important here, and just go, what's really important is me. That goodness is the others. It's the pursuit of what the Lord wants for us.
Yeah.
There's what struck me about that quote is how hopeful it is. Obviously, as we've said, going against the grain is not always here. This stuff isn't always the easiest or the most comfortable to absorb, but it's simply stating that if you are going through spiritual crisis, you are regenerating. It's a good thing. And you know, on the opposite side of the spectrum, we kind of all know this, right? If you are a sociopath, you can't be having a crisis of, you know, of compassion. Like you can't be got at that way. Just like I personally believe as deep of loves and joys and etc. that pets have, they probably don't have existential crisis, right? So the same would be true there. It's a proof, as tough as it is, it's a proof that you're improving, right?
Which is good to know, because it doesn't seem like it.
No.
At the time, it seems like, oh, things have gotten much worse. But I think about the difference between pain that you understand and you know is fine versus pain that you don't. Where if you, why is this part of my body hurting? Versus when you're sore from like lifting weights, that can actually feel great because you know this is going well for me. And I have two thoughts on that. So one is, the stuff goes worse for you when you're on the right path. Well, let's say that you were trying out for a basketball team. You made it onto the basketball team, and you were there practicing, and the coach is always like going at you and giving you feedback. You did this wrong. You should have pulled up here. You should have switched to your left hand. And he's not really doing that to the other people. And you're like, why is he picking on me? It's probably because he thinks, oh, you can be really good, so it's worth putting this effort in. Because elsewhere in Swedenborg's books, he says that what triggers these crises of the spirit is God approaching. So as God gets closer, that's what stirs up the evil that's kind of entrenched around us and in us, these evil spirit, the part of hell that's got its grip on you. God says, you know what, I think we can take this. He moves in, and that's why all this stuff gets kicked up. I talked to a therapist or psychologist who said, like, there's sort of a maxim, which is when you try to leave a system, like some kind of dysfunctional system or relationship or something, you're going to get their best stuff. So when you try to break out something, or you see it in like political systems or something, when you're trying to disrupt the status quo, they're going to take their best shots at you to preserve that. You get that inside too. So yeah, it's like a sign that something good is happening. And okay, my final metaphor is, let's say you're going to get your kitchen redone. For a couple of days, it's going to be a lot worse than it ever was. You go, sure, your kitchen was outdated, but now there's no kitchen. Everything's torn out. There's a pile of like old drywall on the floor. You can't eat in there. You can't cook in there. It's like, what went wrong? But you know, this is a step towards something good.
There's maybe this is a little far afield, but I think it's in the Spiritual Diary where Swedenborg talks about a really silly moment. I think he was walking down the streets in Stockholm, and he's talking about the influence of spirits on our thinking. Yeah. And he says that he noticed a pile of dog poop on the sidewalk, and where that noticing came from was the evil spirits that are influencing us notice it because they love the smell. They want us to step in it. You know, that's a part of. So interestingly, he describes this noticing as something, as a gift almost, so that you can avoid it. So our connection, the evil spirits in this passage that it talks about, they are brought about by evil spirits, the temptations or the crises. It's because in the end, those are the ones that are going to give us the awareness of what not to step in.
Yep.
And the only way we come to that awareness is often by stepping in it enough to know not to do it again.
Yeah, with your partner, this is shadow psychology 101. When you particularly flip out at your mother or father as an adult, right? Oh, this thing triggers me every single time. Shadow psychology would say that you're recognizing parts of yourself that you don't like, that you're so much like your mother in this way, you're so much like your father in this way. As strange as the metaphor is, how would we know that I still have something I really need to work on here? Because otherwise, why would I be, I'm not this way with other people on the street, but when my mom says this about, whatever it is, it gets me going. Okay, you can, James Hillman, a post-Jungian psychologist, says pathology is the royal road to the soul. So that when something is pathological, when it's an illness, when it's a sickness, when it's a problem, you can reverse engineer it back to what your soul is saying.
Yeah.
What you resist persists, I think is the saying. Yeah.
So getting new tires on your car is universally something everybody hates because it's super expensive and it's not exciting. There's nothing to it. One time I was coming back from the Philadelphia airport and it was like snowing a little, but not too much. But as I was pulling out, I did this wibble on the road and I was like, oh my goodness, I almost just lost control or fishtailed or something. And I don't know how to get out of that. I was on the highway. So I was just driving really cautiously all the way back. It might have been, but when they told me, like later I got my car taken in, they're like, oh, you got to replace your tires. And I was like, yes, I do.
Yeah.
Because I understood that had showed me, there is a problem here. Or I just connected those in my mind, whether or not that actually was what caused that. It made me think, no, I got to address this. Just like you're saying, I don't have anything going on. Oh, wait, as soon as this person does this, there's something in there that wasn't there before.
Well, and that would be a good sort of transition to the reward, the boon, right? In the oldest stories, it's literal treasure that someone gets for slaying the dragon, right? But we've gotten a little further on than that. So in these more modern stories, it is a sense of self and acknowledgement. So I want to hit on that word self and pass it to one of you two. I assume the direction we're going to quickly go with this as we wind down. The reward for regeneration in Swedenborgian theology would have to be the as of self doctrine. I just wonder if one of you could jump in and sort of explain what that is here.
Sure. So the as of self as a principle is a concept where we recognize that everything that's really good and true comes from God, and yet we need to act as though it's our own in order to appropriate it or to make it a part of our permanent being. And so when we look at the whole of the Bible as a bookend, we talked about Garden of Eden and the book of Revelation. Symbolically speaking, it's taking us from that state of innocence of ignorance to innocence of wisdom. But it's also, there is a selfhood that is always going to be invested in that evil and false old self. The Bible talks about our old self and our new self, the old man and the new man. And that's always going to be there. And yet there is a new heavenly self that is implanted in us. And symbolically in the story of Adam and Eve, they have two children. One kills the other. And then there has to be a replacement.
Yeah.
So Cain killing Abel is kind of a symbolic part of the bad part of ourselves deciding to destroy the concept of autonomy or selfhood that we don't want, but the Lord has to replace that with something. And that's a selfhood that's invested in charity towards others.
Yeah.
Seth is born. And we always forget about Seth. There's Cain and Abel, but then there's Seth.
You're just making that up.
Not making it up. But that's the new selfhood that is implanted after we've kind of gone through the trials, through the crisis, and have come to a state where we're not using ourselves for ourselves. Writings talk about we aren't born for the sake of ourselves, but for the sake of others. And so when we start utilizing our selfhood as a tool to serve God and serve the neighbor, then we oddly get a more distinct sense of self.
I was going to say distinct because in relationships, if you're married and you have a wife, this should be 50-50, right? Like she brings 50%, I bring 50%. But actually, no, it should be 100-100, meaning this is like how you make it really good. So I've heard is like you're just like, I'm going to give my all, and I don't care what I'm getting, but I'm just giving my all. And she does the same thing. That's how it is with people and God in the state of heaven, because to become angelic, you're so far from wanting to be better than other people. You don't even really want your sense of self. You just want to give all the credit to God, and you would say that God is so great. All I want to do is. And God is like, I'm going to give you a sense of self. I'm going to give you a sense of, because I want you to feel like what's mine is actually yours. I want you to be able to be loved as an individual thing. So it's kind of like 100-100. So you end up with this, you're more and more distinctly yourself, even though you more and more are aware of the reality.
And that's the modus operandi, really strangely. That's the thing that causes that. Swedenborg flips the script on a lot of Christian assumptions.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is there's this idea that heaven must be, we've got these monks that seem holier than me. Okay, so heaven must be that even more, so they lose their genitalia.
Yeah.
They gain wings. They aren't truly, they become less and less human and more divine and heavenly. They're meditating all day, and that's a false heaven in Swedenborg's mind. So the way that flips is, no, you become, because of the as of self, you become more and more distinctly feeling physical, and in heaven even physical, connected to people, like you can do good.
You have a job.
Again, the modus operandi is because you are learning more and more deeply through experience that this is actually these are all gifts from God. Yeah.
And I think this is kind of leading us into the pathway back.
Yeah.
And our experience of this leads us to a new place of just being.
Yeah.
Where we have to go from the stage of just being our old self and being frustrated with it in the end, because our old self is going to end up producing harmful things. That's what we're told, at least, and I've experienced that myself. When I'm just me and my old self, I harm things.
Yeah.
But there's a new self that once we are completely invested in it, we almost can operate in that self. We talk about somatic experience or being in a flow state. Is when you kind of forget yourself in the work you're doing because you enjoy it so much. You are just fully invested. So your mind, body, and spirit together are doing that action. We forget ourselves in it.
Yeah. So this is the moment when, from the belly of the whale, from that crisis, there's a resurrection moment, right? And there's things start to head back toward the status quo, but we know that world has been transformed from within. So you recross that threshold. You return back to Kansas. You click the heels, and it always goes super fast in that return. The eagles fly Frodo and Sam. It took months and months to get there to Mount Doom, but now we really quickly pass that barrier. But we've returned with a boon, with a reward. A new way of viewing the world around them. I love from The Lord of the Rings that Pippin and Merry have, because of the hanging out with the Ents, they've literally grown. They're a full, 4 inches taller than all the other hobbits. And they can't go back to the true status quo of what it used to be.
Yeah.
They now see the world in a different way entirely, and that's sort of their reward.
Okay. And also, well, returning to the world where you are, that's very much the Swedenborg thing. Swedenborg says a lot of weird things. You were just talking about spirits making him smell poop in the streets.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how you have heaven and hell influencing you all the time. And there's this whole spiritual side of life that is fantastic and has as much creatures, like it's like Lord of the Rings. But what Swedenborg tells you to do is just go right back into your regular life, and you're supposed to be nice to the people around you, do your job honestly, faithfully, justly, look out for evil things. Like the instructions are so mundane. You return from this big journey to go right back into your regular life. With the boon, I love that. I think this goes right with that. This is Swedenborg from True Christianity. He says, during our spiritual tests, we are apparently left completely alone. Although, in fact, we are not alone. At those times, God is most intimately present at our deepest level, giving us support. Because of that inner presence, when any of us have success in a spiritual test, we form a partnership with God at the deepest level. There's your boon. It's like you come back into your regular life, but your partnership with God is on the next level.
Yeah, I think sort of closing the gap here, a big question would be, why? Why does this story, if Campbell's right, why does this story happen in every culture, through every age, with differences for sure, but with such eerie commonality that it almost becomes, like you said before about, oh, I'm reading this book, now I'm reading this book. It's the same story.
Yeah.
It's eternal newness as well, but it's the same cookie cutter. It's the same model. This is something I've thought a lot about. And for me, this is going to be a deeply Christian-centric worldview here. But for me, this all comes back to why in the Christian model, if you've grown up a Christian or many other religions, why does prophecy even work? Why does it happen? You don't really think about that. Oh, it's just, I've learned about this idea. But how can this person's words tell the story of what's going to happen? And my overly deep answer to that comes down to a metaphor. And from a Swedenborgian standpoint, and you guys can correct me if you think this needs to be tweaked, the moment of the Lord's birth in the earth, into the world, is of such importance that where our actions can echo forward in time, be remembered, perhaps, Caesar Augustus or these big personalities, that can be remembered in time. But the act of being born into the world was of such importance to the fabric of the universe that, like dropping a rock into a puddle, it echoed forward and backward. Forward so that it's remembered now 2,000 plus years later, but backward as well. We know that even if the hells had conquered the world to such a degree that we know that people weren't going to hell before the Lord was born when they should have had a chance to go to heaven.
Right.
That's not what Swedenborg would say.
Accidents.
Yeah,
Right.
He wouldn't let that happen.
Right.
God wouldn't let that happen.
And yet that moment was necessary. So I believe what this is telling us is that those echoes of this hero's journey are of the divine human journey. Mm-hmm. It's this one journey that had to take place, that had to echo backward and forward into what a story is, the monomyth, moving backward in the form of prophecy, in the form of biblical figures like Jonah, who embody what Jesus was going to do or foreshadow that, and all these Christ figures moving forward. I know Campbell goes sometimes a little too far saying this is the monomyth, this is the one myth. Maybe he was a little myopic about it, but it certainly is this this preoccupation with human existence, maybe even down to a physics level, like we said, the sun rising and setting, birth and death, this cycle that goes on and on and on.
I love that. And I never thought about that with prophecy. Why does prophecy work? And why is prophecy such a big deal? Because when you read about the life of Jesus, that this super important that he was born, but that he was born in the way it would say. And he always says, so he did
Such
this
that.
so that the prophecy could be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And one of the last things that ever comes out of his mouth before he's dead from crucifixion is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is he's quoting Isaiah. So that is something about you say it and then it comes true is really important.
And maybe why does prophecy happen? So that people born before the Lord's birth on earth, or living before that, can still receive that divine revelation.
So benefit from it. And I'm all in on the monomyth, because Swedenborg states, which I hope he's right about this, it seems to make a ton of sense, the divine providence is the force that runs everything. So that this is why things are the way they are. There's this big thing, which is the guidance of the divine mind, which we call divine providence, which both directs, like, if I drop this pen, sorry, microphones, which way does it roll? That was divine providence, believe it or not. But he says the intent of divine providence has for its goal a heaven from the human race. Mm-hmm. So to get people into a state of eternal happiness in heaven, that's what everything's about. The monomyth, if it's the same thing as regeneration is the story of how we get into heaven.
Yeah.
So if it's the story of the reason for why everything exists, of course everything's going to tend back. Like, that's the thing. That's the plan. That's the whole stated reason for the existence of anything. Of course that's going to show up. And then the last thing is, we talked about, I think you were talking, Alan, about like, as of self, you have to take it in to yourself. I thought of, let's say that you work at a company, a big company, but they've got some new company culture thing, which is we're going to have this new way of like treating each other well at work, and this is the plan you need to get with to be able to do it. You can just hear that and not act on it. But if you decide, I like that, I want to buy into it, I'm going to act in the way they asked me to, I'm going to say the same kind of things, then it's yours, and you don't think, oh, this came from me. You know it came from the handbook or whatever they handed you, but the person next to you, they might not have accepted it at all, so it's not coming through them. That's like taking God's stuff. Do you make it your own or not?
The handbook is the prophecy of you fulfilling it,
Yeah.
if you fulfill it.
Yeah.
The prophecy side of things, I think, is fascinating because I think it's necessary for a couple of reasons. One of them is how vital hope is in our daily lives. Not just thinking, the history of the world and how are we getting everybody to heaven, but how are we getting Curtis or Alan or Dylan or Stuart to heaven?
Yeah.
There's that same
Stuart being
cycle
up there behind the camera.
Yeah. But
even camera people should have a chance at heaven.
Hope is a vital part of holding on long enough until you see the miracle happen. And because the trials that we have to go through, that the Old Testament really puts a fine point on, you're going to be taken out of your land. We talked about leaving Egypt and getting to the Holy Land. Well, they get kicked out and taken off to Babylon, and there's darkness before Jesus finally comes. That prophecy tells of the hope of the salvation of Jesus Christ, and then he comes and fulfills it. That gives us as individuals hope then as well, that if he came back then for the sake of the world, he will come in my circumstances for the sake of my salvation.
Yeah.
And so there's all of the prophecies working on the eternal level for everybody and in our individual lives. Something else that I love about this is hope as a concept in Hebrew is the word rope. So hope literally is a rope in Hebrew. So think about, what are you holding on to when you're going through crisis? And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think of it also as the golden thread from Golden Thread's Labyrinths. Is what are we holding on to as we enter into the labyrinth? Because that's the vital part of that myth of the labyrinth in ancient Greek mythology. holding on to that golden thread from Ariadne as Theseus goes in to slay the Minotaur. That's the hope of what can happen if we do the work. The prophecy came before. That's what set him up to go slay the Minotaur.
That's great. Let's go into this last stage here.
Yeah.
Which is, so stage 4 of rebirth is the resurrection or the return or the freedom to live. Dylan, do you want to open it? I know you had a quote sort of about what this is and what it does.
Yeah. So again, like, what is this reward for Swedenborg? It's regeneration. It's the as of self, but it's also a new perspective, right? And I just wanted to acknowledge, first off, Joseph Campbell was certainly aware of Emanuel Swedenborg. He writes in some of these books, he was aware at very least.
Okay.
But I wanted to point out how deeply, intuitively, he understood the Bible as a symbolic or metaphorical story, which is, of course, the core, at least for me, it's my way in, the core of Swedenborgian philosophy, that the Bible has a literal meaning, but much, much more important, there's an eternal and deeper meaning. And I want to read a quote, and Campbell had a way of just spouting this stuff off. This is from The Power of Myth, sort of interview. So this isn't written. This is off the top of his head. He says, "The reference of the metaphor in religious traditions is to something transcendent that is not literally anything. If you think that the metaphor is itself the reference, it would be like going to a restaurant, asking for the menu, seeing beefsteak written there, and starting to eat the menu."
Needs salt.
Right? Yeah. So when we take the
dry.
Bible and we take it literally at face value, there are some things that can be helpful there. We're not saying there's no value on the literal level. But he goes on and he says, for example, Jesus ascended to heaven. The denotation would seem to be that somebody ascended to the sky. That's literally what's being said. But if that were really the meaning of the message, then we would have to throw it away, because there would have been no such place for Jesus literally to go. We know that Jesus could not have ascended to heaven because there is no physical heaven anywhere in the universe, no physical heaven.
Yep.
Even ascending at the speed of light, Jesus would still be in the galaxy. Astronomy and physics have simply eliminated that as a physical, literal possibility. But if you read Jesus ascended to heaven in terms of its metaphoric connotation, you see that he has gone inward, not into outer space, but into inner space, to the place in which all beings come, into the consciousness that is the source of all things, the kingdom of heaven within. The images are outward, but their reflection is inward. The point is that we should ascend with him by going inward. It is a metaphor of returning to the source, Alpha and Omega, and of leaving the fixation on the body behind and going to the body's dynamic source.
Mm-hmm. Jesus at the speed of light. He'd still be out there like the Voyager craft from
Right.
71. You'd still ping him.
Yeah.
Of course. And everybody knows that. And I do think that sometimes biblical translations will translate sky into heaven, but that's not how you should do it, because you're mixing metaphors. Same thing with angels. It's actually just messengers, and I think that's kind of splicing correspondences with but keep it all one or the other, and then it forces you to acknowledge there's an inner meaning.
I think that this is a useful thing to explain a little bit of why, if this is a monomyth that's so vital, why isn't it exactly the same story that was handed from God to each group of people? It has its variations, I think, because of exactly what you're talking about, that over time, certain ideas become what they are, and then they ossify. They stop changing and growing with the way that human beings need to change and grow over time. And they become outdated. We need to update things. And so I think there's an important part of what we're doing, which is, letting go of that.
So I want to just leave us with a couple of quotes about like where we end up, according to Swedenborg. What we did all this stuff. What do you get out of it? This is from Secrets of Heaven 3212. When we are regenerating, we are becoming entirely different, entirely new. So when we have become regenerate, we are described as born anew and created anew. Although our face and speech remain the same, we no longer have the same kind of mind. When we have been reborn, our mind opens up toward heaven, and in it resides love for the Lord and charity to our neighbor, along with faith. Our mind is what makes us a new and different person. The change in our state cannot be detected in our body, but in our spirit. And then finally, from Secrets of Heaven, right by the beginning, he says, in regard to our spiritual lives, we now find pleasure and nourishment in religious knowledge and acts of kindness, and these are called our food. In regard to our earthly lives, we still find pleasure and sustenance in things related to our body and our senses, which cause strife until love takes charge and we develop a heavenly character. So you're not wiping out what came before, but it's falling into its order. And the difference is like what you love and what you enjoy changes. That's it. That's all it is now. Before you told me I had to share with my sister, so I'll do it. Now I love sharing with her because I understand that it makes her happy. And I've acquired a taste for that. I mean, all this really kind of comes down to that's the treasure that we can bring back. And what I want to do before we quit here is I want to give you guys a second to talk about your project, Golden Thread Labyrinths, because this is that you're creating like an immersive way for people to experience journeys like this. So tell me everything about what you're doing and why you want to do it and all that.
Yep, I'll take first attempt at this. First, we're in the world of meditation labyrinths. These are something that have really taken off in the West more. A physical stone pattern on the ground that is an archetypal form. With just like these hero journeys with infinite change and difference. But these are literally 4+ thousand-year-old patterns that recur in different cultures. The idea the man in the maze in native populations have a different form, but it's the same idea. It isn't the same thing as a maze. A labyrinth, when talked about in this modern connotation, is a unicursal or one path. You, far from having to choose, am I going to go the wrong way? Am I going to trip and fall in a trap? Am I going to be, am I going to be caught up in quicksand? That's a maze designed to get to the end and you get a little bit of cheese as a reward. Mm-hmm. A labyrinth, the only choice you make is whether to take that first step, enter that labyrinth, and give yourself that 8-9 minutes of meditative walking. There are no choices. You just walk forward, and yet it's the exact opposite of trying to get to the center at the fastest way. It is the very slowest possible path to a central point that follows you, and you lose your conscious mind as you wind left and right, and you make assumptions about how long this journey will take that are proven wrong. The inner time takes longer than the external time assumes it will. So there's this meditative quality where you lose yourself, just like in the hero's journey, you lose yourself and find yourself again. You go off on tangents, and just like in any form of meditation, you lose focus, and then it literally recenters you as you walk. So that's the power of the labyrinth. Mm-hmm. I'll pass it over to Alan to talk about
something about your sharing about the longest possible path to get to the center. There's a teaching that Swedenborg brings up that the Lord won't stop a temptation until it's completed its course. Right. Because if he stops it before it's over, then the reward won't be given.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of, we have to start the path, but it's also the continuation of it. And it's not cutting corners. There's no way to spiritually cut corners, because that's, what we're trying to do is produce ourselves.
Right.
So we're cutting corners off of ourselves, and the Lord's going, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Let's take the process of this world, this life, and actually experience it. And how much is it in our world today where we're trying to get there as fast as we can, where we want to accomplish that goal, where we need that house or whatever it is,
or grieving.
That's another
I want to
big
get
one.
to that place of
I
healing.
got a meeting at 3. Let's see.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, as a simple meditation, it helps me automatically just go, this is a part of a process. And it very quickly takes me out of those anxious thoughts of how do I accomplish this as fast as possible? Or are those people thinking badly about me? Or all of those things can just fade away into today is a day. And I exist here. And I have this previous experience. I have goals. I have this intention that I'm setting today. And that's the inner sanctum. That's the place I want to end up in this labyrinth, at least spiritually. And then you walk. And what's fascinating about the cognitive dissonance side of this is it almost opens up a space in our thinking where it takes us out of logical, rational thought only and puts us into heart space. And it simplifies it in a beautiful way.
Yeah, so the labyrinth itself, just to get to the nuts and bolts, Golden Thread Labyrinths, the whole idea is about taking advantage of this ancient and modern archetypal form to help groups and individuals find or re-find their mission, their core values. Mm-hmm. So if you are from a business or of any sort, from a school, from a place of healing, if you could imagine a canvas rollout labyrinth or a brick and mortar stone beautiful garden meditative walk, we would design through consultation that labyrinth for you. And then what makes it particularly unique in our plans, it would be a QR code that by phone takes you to some cloud-based audio guided experiences that focus even further, that say, for today, do you want this labyrinth walk, this 5-minute or 8-minute labyrinth walk, to be for stress reduction? Or if you're at a school, for
test anxiety.
Yeah. If you're at a winery, do you want to have it be teaching you about the history and mythology of winemaking?
Or a cemetery and grief. There's lots of ways to take those audio meditations and overlay them on the labyrinth in a way that brings about an institution's or a person's own golden thread.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do, is help connect people to that center.
That's so great. So I'm excited about your project. I'm glad you're launching it. I love the Swedenborg influence on it, as I'm predisposed to do. If any of you want to check it out more, there's a link in the description. Thank you to both of you, Alan and Dylan, for giving this time and your talent and energy. Love the conversation. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you're not already, you can join this channel. Just click that little button, and we'll see you next time.